Well, hello there. Good afternoon and welcome to The Pulse. We are coming to you live from our studios here in Accra. Don't forget that we are live on your digital terrestrial TV because we are free to air. You can also catch us on DSTV channel 421, GoTV channel 144. This is JoyNews, independent, fearless and credible journalism. This afternoon, Sarah Jasafo and three other members of Parliament are to face the Privileges Committee after the Speaker, Alban Bagbin, earlier today indicted the lawmakers on grounds of absenteeism.
Who absents himself or herself from 16 sitting days of Parliament in a particular meeting without the permission in writing of the Speaker.
Well, there's a lot of development on this issue. We'll explore the implications of the directives of what could ultimately lead to 3 seats being declared vacant by the Speaker. But also, as the regional reorganization of the National Democratic Congress ramps up, the former Finance Minister, Dr. Kwabena Dufo, is also outdooring a support scheme for the grassroots of the National Democratic Congress. We'll hear from his office as to whether or not the program has the blessing of the party. And we're also keeping our focus on the transport fares. GPRT is likely to adjust transport fares as a crunch meeting is actually underway over the matter. Meanwhile, the Ghana Online Drivers Union is also commencing a nationwide sit-down strike today with a petition actually going out to the ride-hailing application owners. We'll bring you details on that.
At the end of the day, if you work 400 cedis, they will deduct 100 cedis.
That's both?
Yeah, that's both. Normally, you are going to buy a bundle, 20 cedis bundle. And that 20 cedis bundle can't use to work for the whole day.
Don't forget that this is The Pulse. My name is Blair Sogan. The Pulse is brought to you by Global Communities Digny Lu, affordable, safe sanitation. This afternoon, we are streaming live on YouTube and all of our social media handles. You can feel free to be a part of us. Tweet at us with the hashtag The Pulse. My personal handle is at Blessed Sogan. Stay for details. Well, so you're welcome back to The Pulse. This afternoon, we're focusing on Parliament. The Speaker of Parliament, Alban Kingsford Bagbin, has triggered a process that could actually lead to the removal of Domi Kobinya MP, Sarah Jasafo, and 2 other NPP MPs. The 2 others are Ayawasu Central MP, Henry Kwate, and also the Asin Central Member of Parliament, Kennedy Ejapon. The MPs, according to the Speaker, have absented themselves from the House for more than 15 days without permission. They have been referred to the Privileges Committee, which will recommend the appropriate sanctions to the Speaker. Now we can take a listen to the Speaker raising the issue on the floor of Parliament earlier today.
In India, for example, if a member fails to attend meetings of the Lok Sabha for a period of 60 days or more without the Assembly's authorization, his or her seat may be declared vacant. Considering the fact that the 1979 and 1992 constitutions and now standing orders do not include the word consecutive in the computation of the 15 days, it is my considered view that the clear intention of the drafters of this bill is to differ from the previous computation. I admit, with all humility, that Article 971C be read, understood, and applied as it provided for in our Constitution and standing orders without importing any word or words thereto. I have accordingly come to the irresistible conclusion that a member who absents himself or herself from 16 sitting days of Parliament in a particular meeting without the permission in writing of the Speaker is squarely within the ambit of Article 97(1)(c) of the 1992 Constitution and Order 16(1) of the Standing Orders of Parliament. I must also draw the attention of the House to a decision of the Court of Appeal dated 11 December 2008 in the case of Professor Stephen Kweku Asare versus the Attorney General and 3 others, unreported 2008, suit number H1/65/707, that is Court of Appeal. In that case, the Court of Appeal ruled that the permission granted Speaker for a member to be absent from the proceedings of the House cannot exceed 15 days at any point in time, and that it is unacceptable for Parliament to give of absence to a member for a period exceeding the 15-day threshold as envisaged under Article 97(1)(c) and the Standing Orders of Parliament. Honourable members, it is important to recall that in the book, Reap the Whirlwind.
Well, so fortunately, Isaac Kofi has been doing some research for us here at JoyNews on the issue of absenteeism in Parliament. Fortunately, he's joining us in studio now. Isaac, so walk us through the numbers. We know that, technically speaking, 15 straight sittings of Parliament. If you miss that without permission to the Speaker, then it could create some problems for you. But then give us the specifics on these 3 MPs that we know of. First, there is Kennedy Ejapon. Talk to us about him.
Right, let's look at the October to December, meeting, and then let's start with Kennedy Ejapon. So out of the 28 sittings, he was present in just 4, and then absent in 24 out of the 28 sittings. His longest consecutive absence without permission was 19 consecutive sittings. And this was from October 26, 2021 to November 25, 2021. Right. Now, the next person is Sarah Adjoa-Safo, the same period. And she was present in 2 out of the 28 sittings under the meeting and a review. And then absent with permission, 7 out of 28 sittings. Absent without permission, 19 out of 28. And her longest consecutive absence without permission was 13 sittings. And this was from, October 26th. So
comparatively speaking, if you look at an MP like Sarah Adjoa-Safo, we could say on authority that she's in a better position as compared to some other MPs.
Probably this period. That's from October to, December.
Right.
We
need to be specific with the period.
Exactly. So the period is very important. So this meeting, the October to December meeting, Parliament has 3 meetings every year. Exactly. So now let's move to Henry Korte. So out of the 28 sittings in this meeting, Henry Korte was present in just 5, absent without permission 23 out of the 28, and the longest consecutive absence without permission was also 19, just like Kennedy Ejapon, just 19, and this was from October 26 to November, 25, 2021. And then, if we should change the period, this is the January to March 2022 meeting, the first meeting of the year. And so let's start with Kennedy Ejapon. So
we've moved on from late last year, and we're coming closer to the period within which we find ourselves.
Absolutely. So now let's start with Kennedy Ejapon. So out of the 28 sittings, he was present in 12. That's an improvement.
And so he improved from the previous one.
Improved from the 2 to now 12.
To now 12 appearances.
Exactly. Now absent 16 out of 28 sittings. And his longest consecutive absence without permission in this sitting was just 4 sittings. So the last one was 19 sittings, and now he's doing 4.
Significantly improved.
Exactly, in this period. And then now, Adjoa-Safo, 28 sittings. she was present. She was never present in any of the 28 states. So
but that can be contested. You know that
absolutely
clearly because
but we are dealing with
the official records. We need to put that out because you know there's been a lot of controversy about what transpired in Parliament just yesterday.
So we picked this information
when the e-levy, I should say, was being considered.
Exactly.
There were claims that she was marked present when she was not. That's a claim we're yet to verify. But we're dealing with the official figures that
verified information from Parliament's own website. Right. The votes and proceedings, document. That's what we extracted this information from. So out of 28 sittings, she wasn't present in any of them. Her longest consecutive absence without permission, obviously, is 28 sittings.
Right.
That was from January, 25th to March 17th this year. Now, if you should move to Henry Korte, out of the 28 sittings, he was present 3, absent with permission. Absent without permission, 25 out of 28. And the longest consecutive absence without permission was 12. Actually, it was 12 sittings. He was absent in 12 sittings. So it still didn't add up to the 16 or 15 consecutive sittings.
So this quarter that we're talking about now in Parliament, if you compare all 3 MPs, will bring the Greater Accra Regional Minister first, ranking top on the list in terms of those who have done at least some
exactly. So if it should
appear in Parliament,
if it start from
ranking them that way,
October to December. So Kennedy Japan and Henry Korte were all having 19, absence without permission. They were, but Adjoa Safo was doing somewhere around 15. But if it should come to January to March this year, then Adjoa Safo is not really doing well because she, out of the 28 sittings, she's not been present according to Parliament's own record.
And we can just go to Sarah Adjoa Safo right now, which you should be seeing here.
Sure. So clearly, 0 out of 28 per the information put out by Parliament's own votes and proceedings document they put on their websites every day. So she was present 0 out of 28. Kennedy Japan was present.
So Kennedy Japan was present for at least a number of a number of days, which is 12 out of 28.
12 out of 28.
So he's improved from his performance.
He was absent in just 16 out of the 28, and then his longest consecutive absence without permission was just 4. So in this period under review, Adjoa Safo probably didn't really do well because 0 out of 28 per Parliament's own document. So that's how we extracted the information, and this information is strictly from Parliament's votes and proceedings, not our own computation. So we just extracted the information.
But just before we bring in our guest and those who will be helping us do the conversation right now, help us understand what the situation is generally in terms of the overview of MPs and their level of attendance. Are we getting some clarity on whether or not
prior to the passage of the e-levy, you could see that attendance was not really it wasn't something that we could write home about. You could see cyclical movement in terms of the number of absenteeism. It started, it was on the run, like it kept increasing, sitting by sitting. But now that the e-levy has been passed, we are seeing some sort of improvement in terms of the number of MPs who are present in the chamber or present as far as the vote and proceeding document is concerned. But what we just gave you was from October. The first analysis we did was October to December. That was last year.
And then we
also did January to March 2022.
And there you have it. Sarah Adjoa Safo is the problem as we speak. And in fact, that's been creating a lot of problems for the New Patriotic Party themselves. They've lamented about her condition. We'll talk all about that now, but it's a matter that appears to have, appearing to be very deep-seated within Parliament itself, the issue of absenteeism. But fortunately, Nehemiah Atiga, who's the co-founder of Odikro, a civil society organization monitoring all of these issues, is joining us live on Zoom now to have a conversation on what's transpiring in Parliament. Finally, you've been urging the Speaker of Parliament to crack the whip. Now he says he's referring 3 MPs to the Privileges Committee. What's your take on that?
I think is good news. We've been fighting for a moment like this, like forever, because regular attendance of MPs to Parliament is critical to the functioning of governance in our country. At least on 2 counts, whether you are looking at effective representation of citizens during public debates and decision making, or you are looking at just the fundamental, just ensuring efficiency as part of our governance system. You have noticed that if a member of parliament is not present, then one, you are not representing your people, and two, you are not making our governance efficient. So this is solid news for us. They may not be happy, but truth is, if you are not representing your people, you have no business being there at all. And so whether you're missing plenary meetings or you're missing committee meetings, that should be done with some with permission. Once it's without permission and it goes beyond the number of days, then you should lose your seat, as the Constitution says, or at least the Privileges Committee should speak to you, or you should be referred to the Privileges Committee for that to happen. And so this is good news.
Okay, so what are your figures actually telling you? Because we know that at Odikro, you are involved very much in the figures. So you look at them, you look at the MPs, specifically on constituency basis, and you're able to tell if they're doing well or not. Are we being fair to Sarah Adjei-Safo, particularly when she's being singled out at this point? How about the other MPs? What reports are you getting in that regard?
Well, I think we cannot play on the numbers of fairness at this point, because fairness would be that you ask permission and be absent. If you are absent without permission, then the issue of fairness cannot come into play. But we've seen that a certain percentage of MPs, 72% of NPP MPs, have been absent, and as compared to maybe 28% from the NDC side. And we've also seen that multiple MP7 multiple terms have also hovering around 63% as compared to 37% when it comes to new MPs. And we've also seen a certain number around MPs with ministerial status vis-a-vis those who are, should I say, regular MPs. So these things may come into play. You may see that somebody like Henry Korte may be carrying out his duties as a minister, and things like that. So that could be an issue. But then again, what are you prioritizing? The fact that your people elected you to represent them, or the fact that you've been appointed by the executive to serve in a certain capacity? And so the numbers tell us something, but I believe that for Honorable Kennedy Japan, anytime we crunch our numbers and he is not down there, it means there's something wrong with our data. He's usually down there. It's standard that he's usually down there. So it's really a thing where maybe he can't really be bothered. For Henry Korte, like I said,
when you say he can't be bothered, are you of the opinion that, I mean, he may go scot-free, and that even the Parliament's Privileges Committee may not be able to crack the whip?
I'll say yes, because they've never actually taken any action, even after all our efforts. I mean, Parliament has discussed the work of Odikro on the floor of Parliament,
right?
And if they have done that because they know what we've been doing, then they know that there's clearly a situation that we are pointing out. And if they haven't taken any action over the years, and now they are taking an action, you're wondering how far they will go with this action. Would they go to the point where they would actually take the action prescribed by the Constitution, or they would just agree on something based on their standing orders?
So practically, what's your expectation? And I guess that's the concern of a number of Ghanaians out there who are asking the question. So what could be done? What could be done to these MPs? What's your expectation?
If we want to uphold the Constitution, that would mean that they would have to lose their seats, and then we'll have by-elections for them. If we want to, let's say, take the approach where maybe they will be cautioned and then expected to, should I say, improve their behavior in terms of attendance, then maybe that could also be a situation where you are giving them a second chance. But once they are in contravention of the Constitution, remember that they are lawmakers. And so the only option or the expectation for us as Odikro is for them to lose their seats.
Right. Nehemiah, I'm grateful that you've been able to join us. We'll see what Parliament will do about this, but you're obviously watching, and I'm sure that you'd bring us some updates in the coming days. But there's a lot of developments on this. In fact, in the MP's area, and I'm talking about Adjei-Safo herself, there's a lot of concern by the party grassroots. Theophilus Ansah is the General Secretary there, will definitely come to him and hear what the party will be doing about that. But let's take you now to Parliament. Parker Wilson has been monitoring events for us. Parker, so what's the latest in Parliament? Well, we'll get Parker for you as well. Parker will also be joining us to share with us what the reactions are and what MPs have been saying about this. There are some who are challenging the decision of the Speaker of Parliament. So we'll cross you over shortly. But there's a need for us to talk about some more issues that we're focusing on here on the polls. Back to Parliament, there's a lot of reactions from Parliament on the issue of absenteeism. Kwesi Parker Wilson is joining us now. Parker, what more can you tell us? We understand that Parliament has been thrown into a state of chaos when the Speaker actually referred these 3 MPs to the Privileges Committee. What can you tell us? We'll try and connect shortly with Parker, who has the latest from Parliament on this. We will be getting you the reactions of the MPs, particularly some of them in the minority who are also challenging the decision of the Speaker. Parker, if you can hear me once more, I'm asking, what's the latest in Parliament and what are some of the reactions from the MPs? Well, Parker is having difficulties hearing us, but we can take a listen to Muntaka Mubarak, who's the minority chief whip. We'll get him shortly, but first, Parker is also on. Parker, I'm asking about the reactions that we're getting from MPs on this.
Blessed, the members of Parliament are not essentially enthused about the ruling from the Speaker of Parliament, Aban Barbin, and Muntaka Mubarak has been making the point that the Speaker is not clothed with the powers to refer the conduct of these 3 MPs to the Privileges Committee. And that if that is allowed to happen, what it means is that in the future, when they have a speaker who is a dictator, will just walk into the chamber, sit on his chair, and starts directing members of Parliament to do certain things. And so for him, he's not really happy about the Speaker's position. I must say that when he was on his feet to make this point, the Speaker, one way or the other, sought to shut him down, ask him to sit, but he stood his grounds and proceeded to make his point. We can listen to Muntaka Mubarak when he was making the points in the chamber.
And so, Parker, we'll hear from Muntaka Mubarak shortly. But beyond all of this, when do we know, what details do we have on when the Parliament Privileges Committee will be sitting on the matter? Now,
the Parliament actually is rising today. Today, their agenda, they're going on recess today, and we don't know when they are coming. Actually, they are yet to communicate to the House, but the Speaker's directives are clear that the Privileges Committee should treat this matter with the needed agency, and that they are asking them to submit their report to the plenary 2 weeks after Parliament resumes. And that is after Parliament returns after the Easter break, because they are going on a recess for the Easter break, and also to have some break for themselves, meet their constituents and brief them on what's been happening in the chamber. And so that is the information that we have. The Speaker is clear that the petition was from some civil society organization. We know that Mubarak petitioned him. We know that ASEPA also petitioned the Speaker. And Okujo Tablaka has been raising the concern of the 3 members of Parliament who have been absent or breaking the order 16 and 17 respectively, basically because they breached the rule. I have with me Rashid Popo, and let me just get a quick reaction from him. Rashid Popo is a member of the NDC. I am curious. Some say the Speaker's directive, it's clear, and yet your caucus, being the minority side, is against the Speaker's directive. Why so, sir?
Well, not directly against it, but it was important for us to seek clarity in exactly what the Speaker meant. Remember, the Speaker has been the longest-serving member of Parliament, has got a lot of experience, knows the law, understands the standing orders. So he makes pronouncements from the point of knowledge, which might take us by surprise if we are not abreast with the circumstances. So people were eager to get to understand exactly what he meant by the pronouncement he made. But essentially what he is saying is that there are 2 types of references. When they make a reference to him as a speaker, it's different from when they make a reference to Parliament. Yes. So this reference was to the speaker, and so he acted on it as the speaker would act on an issue by directing it the way he thinks fit.
So for clarity, when he is petition as the Speaker, does he have the powers? Because I've not seen that in the other paper, the standing orders. Does he have the powers to direct or refer it to any committee?
That is the question, and that is the point we are yet to get the understanding. But that is what he says. And the rulings of the Speaker, if we do not have clear-cut definition in the law or in the standing orders, would operate until there's a change by another decision. So these are areas that we are still experimenting with, and that's why precedent is important in Parliament. And so we are looking at it depending on how it goes. If anybody moves a motion to challenge the Speaker's decision, eventually, and the motion succeeds, then that decision will override the Speaker's decision. But for the meantime, the ruling factor in the decision made by the Speaker is that we are going to go by what the Speaker has said.
Muntaka served the notice that was going to challenge the decision. Is that something you support? Is that something the caucus agrees with?
Well, at the point he was speaking, of course, you follow your leaders. Other than that, we have not gotten individual positions in this. We have Mutaka making a very powerful, remark, and then challenging the Speaker's decision. And he eventually says he's going to move a motion. We are yet to get the essence of the motion, what it means, and then it will carry us along if it does convince us that it is in the right direction. But before he does that, he will definitely have to consult us for us to have a common position, which will then drive the motion.
And finally for me, Chairman Sabonso being the majority that made the point, this is my final question to you, that when the matter is before the Privileges Committee, when they are done, the report should be binding on Parliament. There's no need for the Privileges Committee to refer the report to the plenary for them to take a decision on. That is where he disagrees with the Speaker. What is your position on that, sir?
Well, he operates on a rendition in the Constitution, which says if a member of Parliament is found consistently absent for a fortnight, he shall give up his position, be removed. Now, but if you look at the same standing orders, I think it's 104 or so, it is saying that members of the committee, after dealing with any issues, would have to get back to the House and report to the House. When you report to the House, you don't report for us to sit down and just listen to you. We debate the results, the report. And it doesn't come to us unless it comes in the form of a motion. All reports come to the House from committees in the form of a motion. The motion is debated, and then a stance is taken. Now,
so in this case, what should happen? Should the Privilege Committee submit the report to the plenary, or you agree with what majority?
No, the committee must submit the report to the House. The committee cannot be an independent committee from Parliament. The committee would have to submit the report, and if the report of the committee says that the people, the individual members who came before them have not been able to absolve themselves, have not been able to explain, and must leave the House, then we will go by that. We will flow with that, but that will depend on how much convincing there can be with members of Parliament, and then we can go along or not go along with them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Rashid Pepo is West Central. Member of Parliament for the NDC as well. And Blessed, finally, let me say that these three MPs, in the event that the Privileges Committee submits the report to the plenary for consideration, and there is a vote, these three MPs cannot vote because they cannot be judges in their own case. Your case is pending before the House, and so they will be denied the right to partake or participate in the vote to decide whether or not their seat should be declared vacant. So that is also some of the controversies that the majority is looking at. So for these three MPs, we are yet to know when the committee will begin. And the committee is chaired by the First Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Joseph Osei-Wusu. We are yet to know when he will start the hearing and when the three MPs will appear before them. But certainly we are clear in our minds that when Parliament returns 2 weeks after a resumption of parliamentary duties, they have to submit their report to the plenary. And the NDC is clear that they hope that the challenge would find favor with their colleagues on the other side, so that a member of the House can raise the matter before the House for whether they should be referred to the Privilege Committee or not. So that has been a disagreement and a misunderstanding here in Parliament. I must say it became a bit heated at some point, but one way or the other, the Speaker managed to calm the tension. And blessed, I'm sure I heard Akable talking about the Dasin North issues. He's in chamber. I've seen him in chamber. He's been in Parliament this morning. He's been around participating in parliamentary duty. So if our viewers, and of course you want to know where the Sin North Member of Parliament is, I must say that he is currently in the chamber participating vigorously in parliamentary duties.
Giving us a 360 on what's happening in Parliament. I'm grateful. And thanks for staying with us here on the JoyNews channel. We're crossing you over to the Tank Palace Hotel here in Accra, where the Imani GIZ reforms dialogue is on. We can now listen to what's happening right there.
A gender balance in a paneling of guests. And so we were very grateful when somebody suggested that there's a certain very astute economist at the University of Ghana we should try. And so we did. And we have fallen in love with her ever since. And you possibly would have heard her talk to us, helping elucidate on a number of things when it comes to the economy of Ghana. And she's in the person of Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafwa, and she's also with us. A round of applause for her. We'll also be joined by Dr. Sam Mensah. You may know him. He's the founder and executive chairman of SEM Group, and he would be our guest. Honorable Dr. John Kuma is a Deputy Finance Minister. We're expecting him to join us shortly. Meanwhile, we are live on the JoyNews channel. It is on the multi-TV channel. We are also live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube, and we are live on Imani's own YouTube streaming service and on their website as well. And so wherever you are, you can join the conversation on Facebook because we are streaming. The conversation is happening, and I see many of you already participating and sharing your thoughts on the key question. We are also, as I said, on YouTube and on the JoyNews channel on multi-TV. The question is simple. Is Ghana's macro environment an enabler or a hammer to attracting investments? You hear the experts, but I want to hear from you also. I want to now invite Mr. Kwame Pieni, who is going to be giving us the keynote address to kick us off. A round of applause for Mr. Pieni, please.
It isn't personal that I have not been accepting to speak. I'm trying to retire. And whenever I speak publicly, people insult me. I don't mind, because I think if you're a public personality, you sacrifice a little for the people. And I think the younger people should be heard, and not those of us who are getting ready to depart. My thanks to Imani and Jazet for making this possible. I believe in as many people as possible talking on topical issues, especially on the economy, because the more people who talk, the more perspectives you get, and then you get to the truth. Most of us, when we're children, will listen to the Aesop stories and the Hindu story of the three blind people who are trying to describe an elephant. And for children, it's just a nice story about the different ways they see the elephant as a trunk of a tree because they are holding on to the limb or the tail or the trunk. But there's a deep philosophical insight from it. And it shows that you have to come from different perspectives. You need several perspectives in order to get to the truth. And this is why I think people should always let people talk. And when you talk and people say you shouldn't talk, don't mind them. Because in Ghana, those of us who talk do not know, and those who talk do not necessarily know. And I would have loved any topic that comes up, that we get the views from academia, from practicing economists, from the business community, and that the decision makers will listen and then move. And then all of us, our life will be easier. We have a beautiful country with about 32 million people, resources. If we don't start now and move very quickly, we are soon going to be about 50 million, and there will be a lot of people sleeping and making babies on the streets with no education, and then we are really in difficulties. And what we have now will be not too difficult. And the subject is the macroeconomic environment, an enabler or hammer to investment. I must confess, I did not understand the topic. I asked, what is a hammer? I thought it's one of these things that the modern people use in rap, and apparently it wasn't. Was somebody going to help me, or I'm going to do it myself? Am I in the right direction? So I'd like to start with definitions. When economists talk about macroeconomics, it's a broad aggregate. The value of goods and services produced in the economy, and you can break it up into consumption, investment, the big ones. And then, for example, the price levels, interest rate, the exchange rate is a price, and, okay, good. It works, yeah. Yeah, this one. Yes. That's what I did. Oh, I have to point it. Oh, I didn't know that I'm asking it to do something.
That's it. Okay, you're gone.
Oh, you can sit here, and then when I do that, then you can do it for me. Yeah. But the interplay between these aggregates, their dynamics, and all these combined help us and leads to, hopefully, increasing our living standards. But they are just aggregates. None of them is magical. Exchange rate is a price. It shows whether you are importing more than you are exporting. Price levels show whether there's supply, demand, interplay. And we should not take any one of them and make it sacrosanct as if this is what we are working for. They are broad aggregates, and the levels and the changes in them is important. Can you do the next page for me? I'm still doing definitions. The environment. And by the environment, I understand the peculiar Ghanaian network of factors and actors that swirl around the discussions of the economy or any of these aggregates. A very famous chairman of the governing party now called some of these noises the ugly noises of politics. You know, they swirl around, and then our perceptions, all these are the environment that surround the macroeconomic debate. And they influence the tone, the direction, and the shape of the discussion. Next one. Enabler, normally in social sciences, is not positive. You are deemed to be an enabler if you are a parent and you are being permissive. But I'm taking that for Imani, enablers to be positive. The positive things that help stimulate and direct the economy in the right direction. And I'll take a hammer I understand, you know, people on the stock and say, oh, this share took a hammer. It means that it was really beaten down. So hammer is going to be understood to mean those that adversely, the set of factors that will have a negative effect on the economy, or on the development or growth of any of those aggregates. And sometimes we need to manage expectations. And managing expectations can be difficult if the noises surrounding a particular macroeconomic aggregate is being handled publicly. I remember a very good friend of mine calling me and saying, you are making it very difficult for the Bank of Ghana to manage expectations around the currency. Of course, if people believe that the cedi is going to depreciate, they all will make their demands. We are in April now, but most of the shopping that was done in Christmas, the time has come to pay. Our dividend profits, the time has come to pay. So if I know that the cedi is stable, I'm going to wait and go and get dollars when I need it. If I know it's going to go the other way, then I park all my cedis in the banks and ask people to grab all the dollars. And of course, it becomes difficult to be able to manage the expectations. Can I have the next one? By investments, everybody knows that is when you put money aside in the expectation of creating a stream of income to benefit from it, or you invest in an asset in order to be able to appreciate and benefit from it. I wanted to add also investment in kind, because in the olden days, we used to be able to convert young men and women sitting under the mango tree talking or rapping. If you could get them to do community work, you divert them, and then that is investment in kind. They can make a road or clean up. But now it is becoming more and more difficult in Ghana to do that investment in kind. Nobody can ask any young man to go and do anything. You either have to pay them, and if you are not paying them, they are not going to do anything. And then, for investors, the next one. What is important is the interest rate. What is the interest rate that is prevailing? Most investors will want to get a fair or better than fair risk-adjusted rate of return on their investment. Most of them will want to know what is the expected rate of return before they come and invest. And I believe that it used to be in Asia, 10%, Europe about 4% is good. When people are coming to Africa, because of risk perception, they may want about 20, 30% before they are investing. And for most investors also, they want to know if the government is borrowing, and we take government borrowing as risk-free. So if the government is prepared to pay 10% interest, that is supposed to be the risk-free. And then for me, they will want something more because I'm supposed to be more risky than the government. Then the other prices that an investor is interested in are the Bank of Ghana policy rate. As far as I'm concerned, the Bank of Ghana policy rate, the only significance for me is the change. If it's going up, then I know that they are not comfortable with the fiscal stance. That is the government's revenue expenditure equation. If it's going down, then I know that they are happy with what the government is doing, and therefore the exchange rate and other prices may be stable. And whatever we do these days, we have to make sure, if we are talking about the environment, the macroeconomic environment in Ghana, how we produce those goods and services that give us those aggregates is also important, because if we do not seriously tackle the climate issue, already in April, we've had just one rain in Accra. Normally by January, there would have been some rain, and then we plant the corn, and by Easter, there will be fresh corn available. The fresh corn I am seeing around is not what has been grown in Accra. And of course, climate change also means that we in Ghana should also be moving towards a greener, from fossil fuel to greener economy. And for us, the sun is there. So we need to be able to move in that direction. Why is the macroeconomic environment important? When we have relative macroeconomic stability, it doesn't have to be absolute. Relative macroeconomic stability, for example, your cedi doesn't have to be fixed. It can depreciate. And if your cedi is depreciating slightly better than domestic inflation, then exporters will be happy. So it has to be relative, not absolute. But if you don't have strong macroeconomic stability, you need that. It is necessary for your economy to move in a robust manner, but it is not sufficient. It is a necessary but insufficient condition for you to make social progress. Steady, robust, and sustainable growth in GDP provides the resource wherewithal. That is, if your GDP is growing, people have disposable income, then you can also expect to tax people without they are complaining too much. So it also, and I emphasize steady, sustainable, because what we've been having is we go up, then we come down. So it is important for that aggregate GDP to be growing, per capita income to be growing. If, of course, your population is growing faster than your rate of growth of GDP, then you also have a problem. Then you are not moving to the level of disposable income of around $3,000, where you can then afford to put aside some savings and move towards the stage where you can finance a lot of your investment through your domestic savings. And it also helps you to create some fiscal space. That is a little bit of space between your revenues and your expenditure. And politicians are very good at spending, and you need to have the resources and create some fiscal space in case of rainy days. You need disposable income growing very fast, your savings, and then you get onto this virtuous cycle of your consumption and investment feeding into future growth in the future to produce more and more goods. And of course, if your growth is also employment generating, then you have the blessing of your youth, restless youth, becoming factors for production, not a force for destabilizing the nation. And relative price stability is good for every country. It creates peace for you. We are all aware what is happening in Sri Lanka. People get to the streets and they want to change the government. So price stability is important. The lack of stability in the city, for example, vis-a-vis external currencies, it was driving transportation costs and food costs in Ghana. A young guy, once told one of the activists in the NPP told me, Mr. PNM, this was at the 2016 election, say when we get into power, you can increase anything. Electricity, don't talk about affordable. Let it be cost reflective. But for fuel, please be careful, don't touch it. He said, for electricity, I spend 10, 15 minutes, make my bed and switch it off. But I need to go to work, I have to take transport. I need to buy food which comes with transport. And when those prices go up, then I'm not going to be happy to be voting. So relative prices, important. If your prices are going up, you are creating a crisis and don't have the space, the peaceful space to think carefully about economic policies and develop the economy. The noises around the macroeconomic environment. In a democratic dispensation, and you also have social media, so everything escalates. And those noises are important, but we need to balance them, judicious balancing. But I prefer that we balance it in favor of people speaking, not they are keeping quiet, because the more people talk, the more perspectives you get. And also, there's no harm anybody talking can do to the managers of the economy, because all it takes to set a record straight is a firm, credible, reliable statement from the managers of the economy, and everybody will keep quiet. If we say we are unhappy with the fiscal government expenditure and their revenue expectations, if we say we are unhappy with that, all you have to come up with is a very credible statement. This is where the money is going to come from. And if you give us that, that will shut everybody up. If you say we should not speak, it's just giving a get-out-of-jail card to the managers of the economy. Now let me talk about the characteristics of the Ghana economy. There's structural imbalance between expenditure and revenue. Structural because it goes deep. And also we have a small open economy dependent upon the exports of commodities and natural resources, which means that when the prices change, then you have external shocks. Low domestic savings, we probably are saving less than 15% of GDP, when China was saving about 50% of GDP, which means they could finance their infrastructure, whilst we need to borrow to finance our infrastructure. The problem with some of these papers is that they stick together. A significant characteristic of the Ghanaian economy is that we lack resilience. Resilience means you have to have some reserves. Of course, there's a problem with having reserves. I remember a debate between the very famous Indian Defense Minister, Krishna Menon, and the Portuguese in the UN, when the Portuguese were saying the Indians didn't have reserves. And the Indian, Krishna Menon, said, you should be ashamed of yourself building reserves when your people are debt poor. And we need to create a balance here. Do we create reserves in order to have smooth, steady growth so that when there's a crisis, we can manage it? Or do we just spend the money whenever we have it so that when there's a crisis, then we have a problem? We've had this. We had bushfires. That set us back. Whenever we feel we have firmly planted our foot on the development ladder, some crisis comes, both domestic and external, and buffers us down. International financial crisis, energy prices, commodity prices, and now the uncertainties in the world brought about by the geopolitical situation in Ukraine. Our external public debt is also now all owed to the market, mostly 100%, maybe about 80% owed to the market. When you owe bilateral donors, Father Christmas will come and periodically wipe off your debt. Now it is no longer. So we have to be very careful. It's not easy. On the plus side, Ghana is a member of the IMF, a paid-up member, which means that when you get into these shocks and you need to make sacrifices to be able to get out of them, you can go to the IMF and get money. If you are serious about getting out of your problem, which we are going to have, inflict pain, sacrifices on your people. When you do a homegrown one, you inflict the pain, you don't have any resources. But when you are ready to inflict the pain and you talk to the IMF and the pain comes, they also provide the resources, balance of payments, foreign exchange to cushion your currency, and support for your recurrent expenditures. Why do we need external invested resources? I put this because it's obvious. For Ghana, if we are to grow maybe 6 to 8%, which we need to make steady progress, you need to invest about 18 to 24% of GDP as investment. If we have a saving rate of less than 15%, the rest has to come from outside. And therefore, you need to have a macroeconomic environment that is attractive to investors to be able to come in. If you take it another way, that it takes about $10,000 to create a decent paying manufacturing job, and about 750,000 young people being added to the labor force every year. You are looking at 7.5 billion in outlays to be able to do that. This is why Ghana, we need to attract foreign direct investment or portfolio investment to keep our economy going. How do we make this economy resilient? We need to be able to walk the talk and do the value addition so that we get more foreign exchange for our exports. We need to do the food security to reduce the importation of items that we can produce in Ghana. We need probably to think about cyclical budgeting. That is, you fix your petrol price, your gold price, all these prices are fixed at a certain level. So when there's more, you don't spend it, you keep aside. When it's not there, then you put it in so that you fill the gap and then you grow steadily. But that I said, this needs a discussion. Do we put reserves aside when our people are poor and we need to grow very fast? And as I said, relative price stability, also make sure that people save. I always told the story of my putting money in life insurance. 10 years later, I got it. I wanted to get the equivalent of about $100,000 to be able to buy a house. By the time the money came, it was around 100,000. But the city has shifted from being 1 cedi to the dollar to 300 cedis to the dollar. So all I had was money to buy a bottle of wine to drink. And doesn't encourage people to save. How can we help build a dynamic investment environment? For investors, the perception that there's a judiciary that is trusted, that will give prompt and fair judgment is important. And therefore, we should all build confidence in the judiciary, and that will make it easy for people to come. The rule of law is very important. People have to know what is right, what you do, not that you say, who are you? I am this, and therefore I don't have to obey the law. Government should be perceived as enabling, taking the private sector as a national asset and promoting it, not as Dr. Frimpong once said, a vampire state, where the state is just there to leech on the people. We need to have a government that is perceived to be catering for the needs of the many, as opposed to pandering to the greed of the few. And we need also to have an incentive structure that directs our best and brightest into productive sectors of the economy. And more importantly, we should not waste crisis. We have a crisis now. Maybe the time has come for us to cut our cloth, our coat according to our cloth. That is, all the big ticket items that we do. For example, I think we need a cost-benefit analysis of the big expenditures. When politicians come with a big expenditure, let us see, how is it going to play out? Is it sustainable? Is it viable? And hopefully, the young economists will be able to put this in colors. This is a free senior high school. This is the percentage in recurrent expenditure, and you do it. The next 7 years, what is it going to look like? And what are we going to sacrifice for this laudable case? And in conclusion, my friend Yao Safumafu, senior advisor, when people were talking about macroeconomic, they say, look, we don't eat macroeconomics, we eat it every day. The exchange rate of the city, macroeconomics, GDP, macroeconomics, GDP per capita. So we are eating it every day, even though we don't know it. And there needs to be a judicious balancing of current expenditures, borrowing, so that there's justice, international justice, so that what I'm spending now on current expenditure is not going to be paid for by my grandchildren. Every generation should have to have its fair share and pay its fair share of the development burden. If we have a dynamic and resilient macroeconomic environment where we are growing steadily, not grow for 4 years, 3 years, and then we come back, 3 years, and we come back, we are not going to do any justice. But if we continue with a strong macroeconomic environment and all of us put our act together, every citizen helping, I am sure that will be a truly middle-income country by 2057, when we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of our political independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwampiri. Mr. Kwampiri, I'd like you to take your seat right behind me, because I'm going to invite a few more of our friends to join you in the panel conversation. Please, a big round of applause for Mr. Piering for me. So we're going to have a conversation, and I'm looking for not only to hear the panel, but also to hear from my audience, because I'm going to make this very interactive. And so microphones are going to be going around for input. I see some very interesting minds with us. Professor Bokpeng, I see you. behind your face mask. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. And so I'm looking forward to coming to all of you to participate in the conversation. This is about Ghana. I've said this conversation is just timely. And GIZ and Imani couldn't have partnered and come up with a better topic for the moment. And let me quickly now invite Dr. Priscilla Chumesi-Bafo to join us on the panel, as part of the panel. Please, a round of applause for her. Please take a seat there. Please, you have to join this one for me. And also joining us is Dr. Sam Mensah. He is a founder and executive chairman of SEM Group. A round of applause to him. And we're expecting the Deputy Finance Minister, Dr. John Kumah, to join us very shortly. When he does, of course, we'll ask him a few questions about our microeconomic environment. And to start this off, I have one clarifying, simple yes or no question to Mr. Peony. Mr. Peony, so the question was, is Ghana's microeconomic environment an enabler or a hammer? On the back of what you just presented, what is your conclusion? Is it an enabler or is it a hammer? Forgive me, I have a microphone there for you. Let me just pick it for you. Good. Here you go.
I didn't understand the question as asking now, what is the environment now, and is it an enabler? As I said, it can be an enabler, and what we should do to make it an enabler. Currently where we are is not pretty. Prices are in the wrong direction. The level stock of debt is problematic. And the big ticket items of expenditure of government, we need to sit down all as Ghanaians and have a discussion, because we want certain social programs, but are we ready for it to undermine? And that's why I kept on saying about steady growth. So if we are here, we are in a crisis now. So if we are in a crisis, the environment cannot be said to be an enabler. For there are external shocks. I have emphasized external shocks. What is happening now is maybe largely the external shock, the pandemic, the uncertainties in the global market, which have shot commodity, petroleum prices and other prices up. So the environment, we should have been in a position where we can protect ourselves from these shocks. So you ask me, the environment, is it an enabler now? If I was an investor, will I be rushing into Ghana to put my money in? Mm-hmm. Probably I'll think again.
Okay, so I guess we get the answer there. Let me now bring in Dr. Chumesi-Bafo. Doc, what's your own broad, general take on the question first, before I ask any follow-up? Because I want you to, lay your own foundation. The question is a pretty simple one. Where would you pitch your tent?
Thank you very much, Evans. I believe that the economy of Ghana does relatively well in terms of growth, like Mr. Peony indicated. But there are inherent challenges in the economy based on the fact that our exports basket is not too diversified. And that means that it exposes us to a lot of vulnerabilities on the international market, international prices, shocks on the world market. So inherently, you find that when all things are equal, the economy does well, but the slightest shock because we don't have a lot of resilience. And why is that? The bottom line has been on the fiscal side, we tend to spend more than we generate, so we tend to accumulate a lot of budget deficits, which feeds into high government debt. At the moment, we are doing over 80% to GDP. And that has a lot of implications on a lot of the other things that investors are looking out for. So indeed, I cannot say that is a hammer. Every policymaker and every Ghanaian wants the environment to be enabling, because we need the investment for employment generation our economy is growing, our population is quite young. So in that sense, I believe that policymakers ought to get to work to make the environment an enabler, but as a stance, inflation rates, exchange rates, and all the other, in addition to regulation and others, it is not too welcoming to investments.
Okay, so I see you leaning more towards, if you have a scale, you're leaning more towards it being a hammer than an enabler. But just on the fundamentals of the question again, said for me, Mr. Kwame Pini laid out his definitions. What for you, if you're considering the macroeconomic environment, will be the factors that will be very important for an investor, for example? What for you will be those key factors? Still with you, Dr. Chumesi, but before I come to it, so what for you will be the key factors that will, for a macroeconomy of Ghana, will be key for any investor who may want to put his money, his capital into this economy?
So for starters, a good growth trajectory, it's an indicator for prospects, and that is something that Ghana doesn't seem to struggle with. The sources of the growth has been the issue. So growth is the country growing, income levels rising, rising middle class. It offers an opportunity. Obviously, investors need some level of security, which we seem to have in the sub-region, in terms of political stability, in terms of the exchange rates and the inflation. Those are key indicators because it tends to erode working capital of investment, and also looking at the cost of credit, for example. So you want to look at credits in terms of how much people can borrow within the domestic economy. When you look at some of those numbers and you compare Ghana to its contemporaries, you find that Ghana seems to have a very high cost of credit. And when you trade, you track the data to, for example, credit to the private sector, you see that credit to the private sector is very low in the country because the cost of credit is high. Mr. P&E indicated, for example, when government borrows, government is the safest borrower for you to lend your money to. So when government borrows on the financial market at a higher rate, cost of credit, it's high because nobody else can borrow below that rate. So all these are key indicators that send a signal. And for investors, principally, cost of capital is a key indicator because it influences the rate of return of any investment that is made. And within all that, the stability plays a role, and all the other indicators in terms of, for example, recently, Ghana is the Secretariat of AFTA, for example. It offers some opportunity which opens the country up for foreign direct investment. I am keen towards foreign direct investment, but I believe that we also need to also look at domestic investment as well, because all these environments, they all play a role when it comes to infrastructure that is needed to support the investment. Is it there? Those are some of the issues that I believe needs to be addressed.
Fantastic. Let me bring in Dr. Mensah now. Dr. Mensah, you are actually doing it, right? I mean, so from that point of view, and you representing SEM Group and what you do, you look at the question, and where do you lean towards, hammer and enabler?
Well, I think that the macroeconomic environment has been an enabler in the past. Unfortunately, from time to time, we've gone off track. And therefore, during those periods, it has been more of a hammer than an enabler. So the challenge that we have is how to maintain consistency in our macroeconomic environment. I think most of the policies that we implement tend to be time inconsistent. So time inconsistency simply means that the government sets a policy or the minister sets a policy, but his successor has the total discretion to roll back the policy or eliminate the policy. So we say the policy is time inconsistent. And I think that it's been a major problem. We have to, in addition to taking macroeconomic decisions, we have to look at our institutions of economic governance so that we can maintain some consistency or minimize time inconsistency. Example, we have, for example, the Fiscal Council, which was set up not too long ago, maybe 2018, something like that. Okay, so we've got a Fiscal Council, but if you look at how it was set up and how it fits in with the economic governance of the country, it is not particularly time consistent. Its term is coterminous with the term of the president. It is an advisor to the president. It is not able to serve as a major restraint on budget spending. So that is one example of a governance area that needs reform. And we can talk about many others. National Development Planning Committee, Commission, it's not time consistent. So if we can just improve the time consistency of our macroeconomic management, I think it will be a significant enabler to investment in Ghana.
Okay. So that leads me to the question, because I think you touched on something I want to explore a bit more, and I'll come to you, Dr. Chumesi, on this. I mean, how you make the macroeconomic environment attractive to both foreign and domestic capital. I think he touched on something very critical, looking at institutions of economic governance. I think he puts it, making it, you know, because as he said, these institutions have become so political that it almost, as he suggests with the Fiscal Council, once one government leaves, I mean, in fact, if you look at the Fiscal Council, it was suggested in opposition as a solution to government over-borrowing from the central bank and blowing a fiscal deficit out of the water. And so then I remember very well sitting in a lecture by Dr. Baumia where he first proposes this as one of the ways of ensuring fiscal discipline. So you don't leave it to the government itself. You have some headmaster holding a cane checking their act. I mean, so just from the way that was even mooted and then became a campaign promise and has been implemented, you wonder, you're right, if this government goes, whether the next government that comes, if it's not MPP, whether they will continue, right? So that's one of the things I want to explore a bit more, Dr. Chumesi Bafo. Dr. Penny has been kind enough to lay it to what the problems are. You've touched on some. How do we make this? We are not only attracting domestic capital. Foreign capital is key. Now we know the problem. We can't even go to the international markets anymore. Well, what do we need to do to be more attractive to both capital, both coming from locally and from international as well?
I believe that the foundation for most of the problems we have has been on the fiscal side. So when you look at domestic revenue mobilization, we are not able to generate enough resources domestically. Currently, we are doing around 14% to GDP, tax to GDP ratio. And so, but on the expenditure side, we tend to have moved towards a very quote and unquote socialist kind of governance where we want to do a lot more on the social front, which is good to try to attend to the needs of the poor. But when you look at countries that are able to do that sustainably are the ones that have very high tax to GDP ratio because they generate enough resources to be able to do that. What we tend to do is that we are quite heavy on the expenditure side, but unable to generate. And how have we financed that? We have financed that when you look through the books, you see that we financed that through consistent borrowing on the international market. Because Ghana is on the horizon in terms of growth, the prospects are great. But this is not sustainable, and clearly recent downgrade of the economy and all the issues, in addition to the external adverse shocks that hit us, which, I mean, most of these shocks sometimes you are not able to anticipate it. And given the very low resilience of the economy, we find what we find. So indeed, we need to be able to generate enough resources domestically. And when you look at trends happenings lately, you find that, for example, the passage of the e-levy bill has led to some positive signal on the international scene in terms of investors, because people were not quite certain of how we dig ourselves out of this very deep hole we find.
Very interesting. I need to ask a quick follow-up on that. My question was on attracting foreign and local capital. On the e-levy question, which of these two brackets of capital will find it more attractive?
Indeed, if you are putting your money in an economy, as a foreigner, you always want to make sure that you can take your money back whenever you want to leave. And so in that sense, you are looking at the balance of a payment aspect. You are looking at government reserves. You are looking at the performance of the exchange rate. So that is critical. And domestic revenue mobilization is essential in feeding into that. And so you need some stability on the macro environment. And if government budgets, it's in a disarray, and government is financing it through a whole lot of other ways, it has implications on the exchange rate. It has implications on inflation as well. And people are looking at the value of their capital. So you do not want to put $10,000 in Ghana and then in 5 years it is worth $5,000. That is not what investors, whether domestically or foreign, want. So indeed, we need the fundamentals. And at the basic is that we need to diversify the economy and make sure that we generate enough resources and maybe pull the brakes on the social expenditure a bit so that we are able to amass enough resources to invest in the infrastructure and capital resources that we need.
Very interesting. Now, if I may sum up your points on how to improve this, I think fundamentally you are saying raise enough revenue, but most importantly, spend what you raise.
Definitely.
Spend what you earn, not above what you earn. I think it's between us says cut your cloth according to size. That's what you're agreeing with.
Yes, that is.
First of all, you say we are not raising enough.
Yes.
But whilst we're not raising, we're also spending beyond what we are raising. Okay.
So spending beyond what we are raising, I'm a bit careful that if the expenditure was moving into capital expenditure, then as a developing country, we need it because it means that it will propel the growth. Yeah. But if the expenditure is in the area of consumption, then indeed...
it tends to be the reality, right? It tends to be the reality.
Sure.
That's the reality. Okay, great. So that's a point. Mr. P, let me come back to you on that question. You lay for us the challenge and what we need to do. Do you agree with the points that have been made about how we make the climate attractive to foreign capital? I think she touches on the exchange rate problem. And you had a fantastic example of how you say for 10 years, you were hoping to buy a house. And by the time the money was ready, you could only buy a glass of wine. That is a big problem for capital, right? Either foreign capital or domestic capital. It's a big problem. You don't know 10 years down the line what it's going to be worth. So I've had friends tell me recently that it's better you buy the dollar-denominated bonds, because if you do the local CD bonds, that's what's going to happen to you in 5 years when the bond is mature. I mean, what can be done to fix that problem?
First and foremost, what is important is to get the economy growing. If you talk about raising revenue, first of all, it is easier to raise revenue when your economy is robust and growing. You need also to take a look at the expenditure pattern. Countries like Ghana, what percentage of tax revenue is being spent? What percentage of GDP is government expenditure? Maybe our government structure is too big. Maybe the time has come for the NPP, the governing party, to do what it says it wants to do. Let us do a tender and sell all the non-critical state-owned enterprises that are involved in production and distribution of goods and services, so that the government sector becomes small. And with a smaller government sector, maybe you don't need more than 15%, 14% of GDP as tax revenue to cover that. And I think very important is that every Ghanaian should view an entrepreneur as a national asset, so that when one party comes and another party comes, you are not going to sack people from being businessmen because they belong to another party. I think that is very, very critical, that all businessmen be respected, irrespective of who is coming or who is running the economy. You know, people tend to emphasize the fact that our tax revenue is too low. It's problematic. And people will even give figures that only 1 or 2 million Ghanaians are paying taxes. I don't know what they define as paying taxes. Go through the structure of our tax revenue. VAT, every Ghanaian pays VAT. If you are talking about, and when they do that, they even forget that cocoa farmers who pay 25% of their turnover are not being regarded as taxpayers. But they are paying about 25%, 30% of their turnover, that's the FOB price. So I think we go back, take a look at the expenditure. To me, when people are saying that, you know, is the tax revenue that is too low, lower than what people like us are collecting, it's like a head of family who has a funeral and says the donations didn't reach where we expected it to be. Cut your coat according to your cloth. If we do that, and before we do any of these big items, let us project it, estimate it correctly. What is it going to cost us? Maybe we have too many districts. Cut and let us have viable districts. Regions, maybe we have too many. So if we want steady, smooth growth, which is the way we want to go, because a lot of these crises will always come, 3 years, 4 years. If we don't do that, most investors who come to Ghana, they are looking to 3, 5 years to be able to make their return. And most investors, foreign investors, if they make a profit, a lot of them, if they look at the economy as being sustainable and going, they will be multiplying their investment. Otherwise, the first quarter that they make a profit, they externalize it. They take it outside. Because if you leave, I was one involved in a company, we had about $30 million equivalent in reserves in the company. Then the city turned around, and within 2 years, we had lost $25 million. It would have been better if we had externalized it as profits and dividends and then brought it back. So when your price price relativity is going wrong, and you are like a country like Ghana, then for foreign investors, when they are in, they will take their profits out. Every year they will declare dividends. They will not leave it here. Ghanaians will leave it here, but every year the capital they have to invest will be going down and down and down. When we started fish farming, the price was 3.5 cedis per kilo. The cedi was equivalent to the dollar. Now we are trying to sell at about 25 cedis per kilo. That's still around $3. But so it's very difficult when you're a businessman and prices are unstable.
Yeah. Dr. Sam, let me bring you in. Dr. Sam, let me bring you in here. As an investor, I mean, over the years, many governments have tried through a combination of fiscal and monetary policies to try and make the environment a bit more attractive to investors. I mean, how has all this combined to improving your confidence level, for example, in the Ghanaian economy as an investor? Recently, we've seen, again, a combination of monetary and fiscal policy adjustments, right? The Bank of Ghana has, significantly increased the policy rate. The finance minister then followed up with a host of fiscal interventions, cutting discretionary spending by a total of 30%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Has any of these in the past combined to effectively improve the climate for you?
Yes, some of it has, but I think that the challenges we have with our macroeconomic environment are the fact that the causes are usually structural. We have inbuilt into the structure, we have it's a structural deficit, for example. It's built into the way our expenditures and revenues are shaped, are structured. So we need to find a way. I mentioned economic governance before. We need to find a way of improving the way we go about managing our resources and the macroeconomy. For example, how do you bring down the deficit or go on a deficit reduction trajectory or a debt reduction trajectory if you cannot get the opposition to support what you're doing? So we need a plan that can be bought into by all sides of the political divide, which is very difficult unless we start to look seriously at our constitution and how it is leading us to extreme levels of partisanship, which makes it difficult for us to have a national plan for maintaining a consistent macroeconomy. So I would like to ask for a more political economy perspective as opposed to just focusing on the economic policies of the government.
Okay, very interesting intervention. I want to bring my audience in now into the conversation. I see the room is packed, and this is a very interesting one. If you're an investor here, I really want to hear your personal experience with our microeconomic environment, how it's either encouraging you to put your money in or discouraging you to put your, take your money out. I want to hear that story. If you have a question or a contribution, we're going to get the microphones going around. Mention your name, where you're coming from, and let's hear your take on this matter. I want to, whilst we wait for that, do you have any interventions? Do you have any interventions? If so, the microphone will go around. Just let me see by hand, and the microphone will come to you. So whilst we have this conversation, I want to put, Dr. Chumesi-Bafo, I want to sort of put this in the context of what is now currently happening. I guess Emmanuel wouldn't have chosen this topic out of the blue. There must have been something happening recently that triggered it, obviously. We've seen the interventions that both the Bank of Ghana and the finance ministers try to do to sort of reassure investors, both local and international investors. And you wonder, the raft of measures that were announced recently, trying to fix the macroeconomic challenges, it shows that it's possible, right? We're trying to cut our cloth now, according to, as Mr. Pina said, according to our size. And you wonder, why haven't we done this before? In 2014, 2015, we did same. Homegrown solutions didn't exactly work out, and so we picked the call and called the IMF to come and help. We seem to be doing same. This cycle seems to be repeating itself. We seem to know how to make this macroeconomic environment attractive to investors, but we seem not to do it until there's a crisis, and then we attempt to do it. You've seen the recent attempt again. Has it convinced you? Is it something that, first of all, is it convinced? Second, is it sustainable? If it's not, how do you make that sustainable? For example, it doesn't become only a crisis intervention as it was in 2014, 2015, but becomes our way of living going forward.
Yes, I think that, Evans, it's not like we don't know what to do. Policymakers do not know what to do. But I believe that the political will to stay on course and do what is expected is not what is what is lacking most at times. So you find that when you look at the trajectory of Ghana's performance over time, when Ghana is under, for example, an IMF intervention, I mean, you find that we are stellar students. The economy performs better. Everything goes on point because we are operating under conditionalities, right? But the moment we exit and then we relax and then politics comes to play in the midst of a lot of promises, ambitious promises on the part of politicians, we overspend and then we find ourselves in a similar difficulty. So for me, I am happy that at least we know that there is a solution, there is a way we need to operate, and that is what policymakers have used to send a signal. So for instance, when you look at the policies from by the Bank of Ghana, you find that indeed these are times that inflation is on the rise, not only in Ghana, but globally. You find that a lot of the Federal Reserves have increased interest rate. That also poses a threat to capital flight because the economies are way resilient and better, so foreign investors would want to go out of the Ghanaian economy if inflation is high, for example. Net returns to investment tends to be negative. So the Bank of Ghana had to come in to pick up the policy rate so that at least we can get some positive returns on domestic assets.
So it's positive and it's possible.
Definitely.
How do you sustain that? How do you make that our way of life? You want to contribute, Dr. Mensah, and then I'll bring my audience in. I have with me Professor Daka with the AGI who has a contribution. I'll take that. But you quickly, very quick, 1 minute. How do you make that sustainable?
I made a point before about maintaining consistency in our policy making. Very often we go into a mode where we do a lot of reform for about a couple of years. The environment is stable, and then suddenly there's a shock, and we go back to where we were before. So how do we, I think the key question is, how do we introduce more stability, consistency into our macroeconomic management? Because businessmen, whether they are outside or here, are always looking at the long term. And it's not a very friendly environment if every so often there's a crisis and you have to roll back what you achieved. So I think that we have to look at our institutions, look at how they can promote more and more macroeconomic management consistency. We have some of the elements already there. We have to tighten them up. National Development Planning Committee, for example, is there. We haven't really used it. But I think the framers of the Constitution were looking ahead, looking at maintaining consistency over time, which is why they created those institutions. But we haven't really used them. So I think that there's room to do better.
Kofi Bento has a microphone.
Okay. So thank you. The topic is about whether the macro situation is an enabler or a hammer. It's binary. It's either it's helping us or it's not helping us. And I have a feeling that our speakers are being politically correct. So we're going to try and push it. I'm hoping that each one of you will tell me if you believe it's a hammer, one main reason why it is a hammer, why it's killing us. And if you believe it's an enabler, one main reason. The reason is that if it's a hammer and we can identify something, then we know what to do to deal with it. And if it's an enabler, we know what to do to improve it. So if each of you can say something about that. And then I need your comment on this. You just mentioned, Madam Presla just mentioned IMF. That dynamic should tell us something. Whenever we are under what we call adult supervision, we do well. When it's off, we don't do well. And I think the reason is because the risk and reward, the political risk and reward dynamic, which is also connected to our constitution, makes it impossible for the National Development Planning Commission to be effective, makes it totally impossible for a fiscal council to ever be effective.
there is no reason, no reward, no incentive for any politician to cede that power. And I think as long as that remains, we will never, the word is never, and sorry, but in Imani we push the limits. And it's important because for almost 30 years, we've run this constitution, and it's not for lack of knowing what to do, but the fact that that person sitting there has the power to do what they have to do, and there is no risk to it, means they will do it until you have adult supervision. So I think that we should drill down to that and maybe figure out how we can get out of that. So first, if you think it's a hammer, one thing so we can do more of that, do less of that. If it's an enabler, one thing so we can do more of that. And then what is your comment about this one?
Okay, so I'll come to take that question. Dr. A. Dake with AGI has an intervention I'd like to take as well. Yes? Can we take that? Oh, okay, great, fantastic. Oh, you I was told you have one. Okay, but let me ask you then. I mean, Association of Ghana Industries, right? This is a conversation about you are the domestic investors, so to speak. I mean, you've seen the conversation. I guess let's start with Bentil's question. Where do you stand on it? Is environment a hammer for you? It has been an enabler for your members?
Well, when you put the two together, one would say it's a mixed basket. An enabler.
You're also being neutral, you know. No, everybody's trying not to.
May I finish this?
Okay.
An enabler sometimes to the foreign investor who does portfolio investments when the interest rates or policy rates are high, and therefore they could cash in, and then they check out. And when they check out, it becomes a hammer to the local investor who puts his money directly into productive sectors. And therefore, then we bear the brunt once the portfolio investors check out. So it depends. So you cannot say straightly hammer.
But for the Ghanaian industry per se.
For the Ghanaian industry
which you represent,
depending on
largely,
the sector.
where is it swinging to? Where is the pendulum swinging?
Oh, for a Ghanaian investor who's really in the domestic terrain, and when a portfolio investor checks out and the city misbehaves, and then that of the various policy rates are jacked up, automatically it becomes a hammer on the Ghanaian investor.
So it is a hammer for you largely.
Well, I have explained my position.
So to the follow-up question then, if that is the experience, can you name one thing that you believe can be done one thing we should do less of?
Two things.
To help prevent that from continuing being a hammer for you?
And I guess that is what we could find one in the area of the the monetary policy interventions. And we keep saying now and again that anytime the governor reads out his reports, we even seek to find the minutes of the reports. Though the data comes out, the minutes will give you further descriptions and narratives of the various commissioners, point on various activities that is happening in the economy. And you find it there very clearly. But per their mandate, they do not release the minutes, which we seek to find because we do not sit on the institutional board. Then you find the data that comes forth. And you see in that there's advice to the fiscal section that, listen, such interventions, and we keep repeating it, the food basket, the non-food basket like the fuel, and that of construction, you see, these ones move the inflationary rates per the basket. So why don't you do specific interventions in the agrarian business? And if you do the agrarian interventions, our next point is the National Planning Committee and the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit of Government.
So you're suggesting target monetary policy?
No, target interventions.
So general
in the basket.
Okay.
Because you see, you need to identify the drivers of inflation. And in the basket, food basket is one of the key that the governor now and again repeats that are his concern. So you will see in 2018, 2019, they did a deliberate intervention in the agri sector until the COVID. However, in that space, that is why we went very hard on the subject matter of the benchmark discount values and its effect on our various operations. We believe that as much as they had a good intention to reverse the impact of the food basket on the inflationary rate, the one thing that was missed was the monitoring aspect to see where to get the feedback and correct the wrongs and perfect their ways. Some interventions that came along that line was the concern of warehousing, because in the initial promises, you realize there was no warehousing. So they brought in the warehousing to complement the food, plenty for food and jobs. And in that value chain, you realize that they were getting some feedback between 2018, 2019. However, when they messed it up and they didn't realize that the intervention of the discount values exposed the manufacturers and the local players, most of the outputs, like the paddies, rice paddy, the cereals that came out from the north, were all being exported at a discount to neighboring countries. So all the 3 billion intervention in the fertilizer went down the drain. So it's a monitoring, evaluation, and that is why the planning unit of government is very critical to tie its activities to that of the fiscal unit of the Ministry of Finance, so that there can be coherent activities and coordination. Okay. So we believe that should be looked at carefully. Okay. And one clear intervention that we believe that was announced that may do us good is the role of the SOEs and their spending. And I think the finance minister stated it recently. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Peony had a very interesting suggestion about the SOE. He says, I think you say we should sell some of them. Those that are involved in the production of goods and services, we should sell some of the SOEs. We should sell all the SOEs.
Not all.
No. Okay.
Infrastructure. Do you want the microphone? There are certain strategic sectors like water, electricity, the ports, harbors. These are national, and these are not assets that we want foreigners to run. Okay. So I believe that food, production and distribution, government should not be in it. Okay. And it will make the private sector also strong, dynamic.
Okay, so that is part of the cost-cutting measures to cut your costs and raise more revenue. Yeah. Take out those burdens on the state, and then you could free up capital for something else that could attract investors. And thankfully, the Deputy Finance Minister is here with me, Dr. John Kuma. And Doc, I'm going to throw you in the deep end, because as part of the conversation that we haven't touched on that I want to touch on, because you're dealing with the macroeconomic environment and how is either a hammer or an enabler. I guess I should start that basic question with you. From the finance ministry point of view, I'm guessing, let me guess the answer. You say it is an enabler. Prove me wrong. It is? No, it is. Okay. So if it is, what is it that you're doing that convinces you that it is? And how do we make that, how do we sustain that over the next? So one of the things we've talked about before you came is that there are some good policy interventions over the years, but they haven't been sustainable. They seem to just change with the government. So you started by saying you have a macroeconomic environment that is an enabler. If that is true, what are the factors that support that, and how do you make that sustainable going forward?
Okay, thank you very much, Evans. Let me sincerely apologize for my lateness. Today, Parliament is rising. It's our last day in Parliament, and we needed to be there to approve some final policies and stuff, so we are very sorry for the late arrival. I will say that the macro environment is supposed to be an enabler. I won't say it's an enabler.
Oh, but I asked earlier, you were very categorical.
Well, because it wasn't my turn yet, but as government, we think that we have to position it, and in our mind, we are positioning to become an enabler. As to the results of it being an effective enabler for businesses and the private sector to thrive, that is why we are here in programs like this, to take the feedback so that we know where to improve and where to take the feedback and make it useful. I cannot set the questions and mark it myself. That would be giving myself 100%. So yes, I in my mind, or the ministry or government in our mind, believe that we are positioning the macro environment to enable private sector growth.
How are you doing that?
Yes, so we are doing that through a number of fiscal and monetary policies that we put out every day. And sometimes some of the factors may be out of control of government. Of course, we all know how external factors like what we are currently dealing with, like COVID, came in to throw away a lot of our economic indicators, which we were doing well. If you check the GDP growth from 2017, 2018, 2019, clearly we were on the path of growth. And any economy that grows consistently on average of 7% per annum means that we were doing something right. And so I would say that we had inflation below 10%, and we even passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act to ensure that as a government, our deficit target do not exceed 5% per annum in every year, and we must also post a positive primary balance. All these were good economic indicators that were to ensure that we create wealth, we empower the private sector to take advantage of this. Of course, it led to reduced interest rate because even the central bank policy rate came down as much as, I think, 13 or 13.5%. But unfortunately, we have seen the reverse because of what I'm talking about since COVID came. And it's not only a Ghana situation. If you check either in our sub-region or on the African continent or even at the global level, almost every economy has seen this shock. For the first time, you are seeing inflation levels even in places like the US or Europe beyond 30 years since they ever had those levels. So clearly, we have been hit by external factors. And as government, we needed to respond. So if you have observed, even in this year, when we presented the 2022 budget and we sought to bring down our deficit and also try to come out with policies that will help the economy rebound out of COVID, you realize that we have tried to even revise not just our revenues, but even expenditure targets. Government has announced that because revenue measures were delaying, like the delay in passing the e-levy, we revised expenditures, especially discretionary expenditures, by 30%. Government is cutting a lot of other, let me say, allowances or support to appointees like fuel coupons and extra interventions to make sure that we are able, there is even moratorium on importation of vehicles, especially four-wheel or 4x4 vehicles into the country. So we are seeking to tighten the expenditure side, and at the same time, we are looking at how we can expand revenue. In fact, last year, the GRA was able to meet the revenue target of 57 billion and even had a surplus of about 200 million extra. This year, the target is to do about 80 billion cedis. But because maybe we had a little bit delay in passing the e-levy, there may be a little difficulty, but it's still possible to even achieve the target for the year. So all these are interventions that government is putting in place beyond even the fiscal interventions. BOG too has also intervened to address the inflation issues. Now we have raised the policy rate up to 17%. And then also the bank reserve rate has also been increased and all that. All these are interventions that is seeking to mop up the extra liquidity which is causing the inflation in the system. And we believe once we are able to target inflation and ensure that the exchange rate stability is also achieved. And I'm happy to observe that, especially after Parliament was able to pass the e-levy, we are gradually seeing a close on the spread of Ghana bonds, and the on the dollar is gradually also slowing down. So I believe that our interventions and government policies is helping to create that enabling environment which makes it possible for businesses and especially the private sector to do well.
So key question, I was listing interventions. The only pre-crisis, and I'm talking about COVID here, measure was the Fiscal Responsibility Act you mentioned. The rest of it had all been inspired by the crisis we are in. And you seem to suggest that it is the COVID and post-COVID interventions, fiscal intervention, does seem to be yielding these positive outcomes. If that's the case, the next question was, how do you plan to sustain it? How do you ensure that this becomes our way of living, so that it doesn't end once the crisis goes away, as we saw in 2014, 2015. Once the crisis disappeared, we went back to doing the same old things. What is
what they like to spend. Government spend in response to the exaggerated entitlement mentality of the average Ghanaian. That's what we are responding to. And if the Ghanaian knows that by responding to these our demands, we are making the steady growth of the economy unsustainable, which means we hit and we are coming back, then becomes a problem. The Fiscal Council was created in order to demonstrate to the IMF and those who were saying Ghana should not get out of a program that we can, and we have the people to help us, guide us. So we don't need any adult supervision. That was the idea that was being thrown out. And we can. But you see, if we were to say that the Fiscal Council is given the power to issue what the Catholics call a nihil obstat, that is, government says, this is the project we are going to build 300 public lavatories. Then the Ministry of Finance should do its work in saying this is the cost, the capital cost, and this is the recurrent cost. And the thing about recurrent cost is that if you spend 1 cedi to do the project, you need 1.5, 3 cedis annually to maintain and operate it. So your recurrent cost burden is going like that. If Minister of Finance then does all those projections, the cost-benefit analysis, then it goes to the Fiscal Council, and then the Fiscal Council will issue a nihil obstat that we have no problem with your doing that before Parliament can pass it. The same with the National Development Planning Commission. To me, it doesn't make sense when we have democratic parties to say that I come into power now and say I'm bound to be doing what my predecessor, whom I thought was doing wrong, that's why I fought to remove him, and I should continue what he was doing. The National Development Planning Commission should give us broad outlines. That is from the NPP perspective, because we live in the private sector. From those who believe that they are social democrats or whatever, to them it should be, serious planning for them to be able to move. But see, finally, when the government changed, and we made the tenure of the National Development Planning Council in such a way that it extends beyond the life of the presidency. But the same members rushed to the government to resign for the government, and it took us about a year to empanel. It doesn't make sense. We as Ghanaians should take the responsibility. I'm elected onto the National Development Planning Council. A new government has come in. I don't care what you say, I'm going to sit there. And that's what we should do. But we all do it and say the Constitution, there's nothing wrong with the Constitution. What is wrong is us, Ghanaians. They say we have structural imbalance between expenditure and revenue. Let's sit down and say, how much are we getting? And I suggested things like cyclical budgeting. I also warned that when you are poor, putting aside savings may not make sense. But this is the debate for us Ghanaians to say that it's like buying insurance. IMF is an insurance. It should not be that there's any stigma or shame going to the IMF. We put our money there and say that when we get external shocks or even domestic shocks like wildfires, we'll come to you and you give us some of our money to ease the pain that we have to inflict. It's not, you know, we have a proverb in my village, you know, say the vulture. You know, the vulture doesn't build a nest. When the rain comes, the vulture says, oh, tomorrow I'll build a nest. Then the sun starts shining, forgets about it. Of course, the sun will shine, but the rain will come. So we should be able to say, the reserves that were built, we should have rules about it. You cannot use more than maybe 30% of the reserves for fighting any. But we can make the rules. Will we go by the rules? That's the problem.
Okay, so that's, thank you very much. I'm going to take a bit more from my audience now in the next 15 minutes and come back to wrap up. Yes, I see a hand in the microphone there. Professor Bopwing also will but yes, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. My name is Mensa Thompson. I'm with ASEPA. My question goes to the Honorable Deputy Minister for Finance. First, we all know that the macro environment includes fiscal reforms. And anytime we've heard of fiscal reforms in this country, it has always been the introduction of new taxes. We've seen the e-levy bill passed into law, and all sort of accolades being given to the e-levy. And but with all indications, the e-levy looks like a contractionary fiscal policy. I want to find out, Honorable Minister, if the Ministry of Finance, before the passage of this e-levy bill, have modeled out the impact of the e-levy on the macro indicators such as interest rate, unemployment, and inflation, if they have modeled out and find out how the e-levy is going to impact on these macro indicators, whether it's going to be positive or it's negative, before they hang this around our neck. The second question has to do with the expenditure cuts. And I want to find out if the expenditure cuts that was announced post-PDRC, if they are not merely cosmetic. Because we do know where the real problems are. We do know where the real problems are. We've seen the huge burden of the wage bill. But over time, in the last 5 years, we've seen state entities like NPA, GMPC, Ghana Gas, SNIT, who previously did not even have deputies. Now some have 2 or 3 deputies. And all these are contributing to the wage bill. How are we pruning the wage bill to ensure that we create enough fiscal space to be able to achieve the fiscal consolidation which some of this discussion aims at addressing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. He's noted the questions. Prof. Bokwe, you want to, I see you nodding your head to something. Okay. And right. Then I'll come to, if you may stand for me, because we want to, this is on live television so that we see you.
Yes.
Please stand for me.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine will be a suggestion, and in line with what Mr. PNM talked about, that we should be living here with some concrete things that we want government to do. And I think the first one I would want to lean towards is the Fiscal Council. And I associate with myself with the comment of the MPP when they were in opposition, that the Fiscal Council should be independent. And we need to go back to that. So, and I agree with Dr. Chumesi that under the IMF, there were certain macro targets that were in line, because as Mr. Bentis talked about, we were under adult supervision. So Ghana is so young that without adult supervision, we are more prone to misbehaving than doing the right thing. So if that is the case, and probably the reason we've been to the IMF 16 times, and with the April 2020 program now counted at 17 times, then how do we create a national institutional restraint that can perform a similar function like the IMF or our headmasters? If we fail to do that, then we will be unique to expect a different outcome by doing the same thing. And that is why practically since independence, every 3 years and some few months, we've had to turn to the IMF. And when you examine the data, you will find that the problems are structural, they reoccur practically every 3 years. So, so a good way to do that, and if you look at the political environment and how polarized it is, we need this national institutional restraint as a bridge between the two main political parties in proper advocacy and getting Ghanaians along. We need to do that because there are certain things that government itself will struggle to communicate to Ghanaians. Okay, but the Fiscal Council can do that, particularly with some of the social programs that are expensively arranged. And I'm saying so because if you look at what happens with Maslock, GD, GDI, and all those things, if you look at the budgetary allocations to those areas, without proper value for money, then you realize that a lot of money is going down the drain that we should be looking at. So let's look at making the Fiscal Council.
So I was going to ask, let's drill down a bit on that. How do you make them independent? Is it in the appointment of those who are there?
Let's look at the Act.
Okay. Specifically, what aspects? So tenure, appointment, what specifically
tenure,
what?
Appointment, reporting, function, budget independence, both theoretically and operationally. We need to do that. Let's not make it advisory. Too many people are advising the president already, right? So let's make the Fiscal Council independent. Let's carve out a certain budgetary arrangement that makes them operationally independent. Then they can even do a lot of the fiscal impact analysis of bills and all of that that goes to Parliament and feed Ghanaians. We need that. If we fail to do that, then the other thing is that, you see, they talked about the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That failed from the day it was passed.
Why?
And I'll tell you why. Without full disclosure and transparency, under the current regime, the Fiscal Responsibility Act could not deliver what it was intended. Because from 2018, we knew that the fiscal deficit was more than the 5% as the Fiscal Responsibility Act talked about. And the reason government complied with the Fiscal Responsibility Act was to treat the energy and the financial sector cleanup costs as outlier. When you include it, the deficit was above the 5% threshold in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So you realize that even before COVID came, the vulnerability was there. COVID only made it what it's supposed to be, and the rest of them. So that is how we look at it. Now, when we talk about the deficit, right, a good way that we mess up the issue is that we have the central deficit that goes through the budget. So as we are counting that, there are other debts that are accumulated from state-owned enterprises that ultimately government have to what? Take it on board. So this works well when we are able to create that institutional arrangement that requires greater disclosure and transparency that enables all of us to have a broader perspective on all of this. Then the other thing is the winner takes all. The winner takes all is not only between the political parties, but it's also between the government and the citizens, where they feel that once we get power, we are able to do anything that we want to do. And I think that itself is not helpful. If you look at the macro environment right now, the last point, it does not enable long-term capital to come in here. Because with macroeconomic instability, people will learn to launch short, benefit from that, and reprice and whatever they want to do and get away with it. So what it means is that projects that have shorter payback period is what investors would want to put their money in. And all of that contribute to higher prices. So to have the shorter payback period, then it means that the price must be what? Must be high, because that is what they are after. So then the other bit is the predictability. Every investor wants relative stability and predictability. Once you deny them that, then it's going to be difficult. All of that may crystallize in risk. And when the risk is high, they only come in when the adjusted risk return is what? Is higher. And that is what plays out. And that capital does not lend to long-term growth and development. Thank you.
Thank you. A few suggestions there that we'll take. Let me start with you, Ms. Dr. Kuma. On that, first of all, do you agree with the suggestion? I think everybody has said that. I mean, Dr. Mensah was first to say Fiscal Council strengthening the institutional economic governance, framework. Do you agree that we should make it independent, the Fiscal Council?
Yes, I agree to such suggestions, but I thought it was already independent. Having looked at the advisory, okay. So you are maybe... Yes, I will check on that. Maybe you are asking to give it more power in terms of its decision and influence.
Well, I mean, he was specific on tenure, security of tenure.
Yes.
The appointments. And then, of course, you've added, you know, making it a bit more powerful and having a bit more teeth.
I agree somehow with
Mr.
Peony. It's not always about setting up institutions or crafting the laws or setting up new barriers, but sometimes it's also to do with us, the people who eventually get selected to serve in these institutions. How about the National Development Planning Commission? It's independent. It's supposed to have its own programs that will direct government. It's constitutionally backed. And yet, we are not getting the kind of results
because politicians fail to implement what the blueprint they give you. It's as simple as that.
Which I agree. So what will insulate this new proposal, assuming you go ahead to enact another law that says that you've set up a fiscal council that is independent with the same authority given to the NDPC. So let's address the problems. Otherwise, we will keep setting up structures upon structures and not getting the results. I think I agree. There's a problem. But I don't think the solution is in giving new institutions names and empowerment in laws. We should rather build the capacity of the existing structures that seek to serve the same purpose and strengthen those who serve in those capacities to help us get results. And I think I agree with Mr.
And then the e-levy question.
Yes, the e-levy question. Mr. Thompson of ASEPA, I mean, I'm surprised that you are saying that all fiscal reforms in our country lead to tax increases. I'm very surprised at that conclusion. It's not true, because we are just talking about Fiscal Responsibility Act, which has just recently been passed. We are talking about fiscal councils. We are talking about even cut in our expenditures. Even recently announced fiscal measures all did not lead to increases in taxes, but somehow there were a lot of cuts in the expenditures as well. Obviously, you cannot do any financial planning by only looking at one side. As you seek to cut, you must also seek to increase your revenue measures so that you are able to balance your sheet. That is why sometimes it's inevitable that government will have to introduce a revenue measure like the e-levy. So it's not always that you get a result that once you are seeking a fiscal reform means going to increase taxes. It's just one aspect, which is the revenue measure. But there are several evidence to show that indeed it is not always leading to increases in taxes. I agree also that we can do more in terms of the efficiency level of our fiscals, especially on the expenditure side. We have to do more. And I don't believe it is in names or structures of putting up new institutions. It's about building capacities of existing monitoring and auditing and assurance systems that we already have to be able to do the checks properly. Otherwise, you keep on setting up new institutions and achieving no results. I think we have enough structures and laws in place that if we are able to build capacities of those who go into those offices, we can achieve a lot of results.
Okay. I want to wrap up now. If there's one more contribution in the audience, I'll take it. Other than that, my panelists get 1 minute each. And I want you to use that 1 minute each as we wrap up to just bullet for me what are your key interventions to making the macroeconomic environment an enabler instead of a hammer. All of you have said many things in the course of the conversation, but this is just a minute to bullet summarize your key interventions, something that we can take away for us of a sort. Dr. Mensah, I'll start with you. What will be your bulleted points in a minute? Summing up for me your interventions.
Well, I still maintain the position that I started with, that we need to maintain a stable fiscal environment to encourage investors to come in, whether it's local or international investors. And to do that, we have to improve our economic decision-making and management. We're not suggesting that we should create new institutions, Honorable Minister. we're suggesting that the institutions that are on the ground be reconfigured so that they can have longer terms, they can have autonomous decision-making, they can bind better to the public, especially in the cases like fiscal responsibility, Fiscal Council and National Development Planning Commission. We're asking that they should be given the opportunity to be able to have terms that straddle the government's terms so that they can feel free to talk about what every government in power is doing. I think that we have opportunities to do that. Reduce discretion in the system. We have to try and reduce discretion so that we get consistency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Shumisi Bafo, what's your summary of interventions to make the environment an enabler?
Okay, thank you, Evans. I believe that for the environment to support investments, government budgets ought to be put in check. We have all talked extensively about that. When you look at the cost of borrowing by governments on the domestic market, it's too high. You compare Ghana to other economies. The government of Ghana borrows an average of 13% in 2020. It is too high, and that feeds into the cost of credit. So the Bank of Ghana needs to look at that with government. When you look at the spread of exchange rates on the Ghanaian market, it is also way too high, above 12%. So you look at economies like Kenya do 5%, South Africa 2.8%. Ghana's own is too high. Why the policy rate and the Ghana reference rate is not able to bridge the gap between the lending rate is something that I believe Bank of Ghana needs to take a critical look at and see why commercial banks are pricing loans that high. And also when you look at the other environment in terms of infrastructure that supports investment, it is important that we invest in it. It is important that we make our laws not too opaque in terms of our regulations towards land title, ownership, in terms of legal rights, Mr. Pieni mentioned. A lot of them are not too transparent, and those do not foster investment. There's the issue of transparency, government contracts, corruption, all these environment feeding. So it's a bouquet of things. And I believe that we need to work on that to make the environment
an enabler and not a hammer.
Friendly to investment.
Great.
Yes.
Mr. Penny, I started with you. Let me end with you. What bullet for me? I know you said a lot. Just crisply summarize for me in a minute what your key intervention is. And you may please use the microphone for me so we go all hear. In a minute, how would you summarize?
I'll summarize by saying the environment is created by all of us. Looking for autonomous decision-making entities. I mean, it just won't work. The Fiscal Council, we're debating, how does the Fiscal Council work? Do you come in before the budget is made? The biggest institution with the clout, the power, the analytical skills is in the Ministry of Finance. Are you going to create another Ministry of Finance? Or the Fiscal Council comes out before the budget is going to be read and goes to advise the Minister for Finance? These are the issues you should be looking at. Or wait when the opposition is criticizing the budget for them to come to criticize the budget.
Okay. Mr. Pini, so if it's not making it autonomous, what would it be for you? What's the key thing to do now to intervene?
Just something to be there, and as I said, let's give it the power to say, on big ticket items, free senior high school, some of the things we do, districts, creating regions, Minister of Finance that they analyze their cost benefit, and then they have to take a look at it and give the nihil obstat. Say we have no objection. It is sustainable. It is within the recurrent expenditure frame. And as I said, I like the Economics Department, please do a chart for us, a bar chart. Government expenditures, project 7 years. Free senior high school, how it's going, how. And then we as Ghanaians have to decide what we should keep aside. When I was in the Ministry of Finance, when your minister or you allow the Prime Minister to go and promise something, immediately you come, I call the Principal Secretary, which of your projects do you want us to cut? And we'll cut it. You know, so to me, where we are now, our emphasis should be cost cutting.
Okay.
Expenditures. We create institutions. We call it what? Value for money, audit, sitting in parliament. We don't need that.
Okay. Mr. Peony,
let me just end by
in
saying,
30 seconds. Yes.
A second by saying that all of us as Ghanaians have to put our shoulders to the wheel to make sure we create an environment that is conducive. When we wake up in the morning, let's say, what can I do for the business community to prosper? If you're a policeman, what are you going to do? Not arrest people, but what are you going to do to make the businessman's life less complicated?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. A round of applause for my panelists there. And the voice you just heard started us off and has ended us is Mr. Kwame Peony, who is an economist. A big round of applause for him for me. You also heard Dr. Chumesi, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo, an economist with the University of Ghana. Please give a round of applause for me. Dr. Sam Mensah is a founder and executive chairman of SEN Group. Please a round of applause for him too for me. And of course, we had the Dr. John Kuma, who is a member of parliament and also the deputy finance minister. A big round of applause for him too as well. Oh, okay, in the parliament, of course, he's a member of parliament indeed. In your constituency. Okay, great. So he's your constituent. He's your godfather. Okay. I want to say a big thank you to GIZ. GIZ made this possible. A round of applause for GIZ for me, please. And they've partnered Imani to bring us this dialogue series, and this has been a very fascinating one. Imani, thank you very much for this partnership also. Imani, Franklin, Bentel, Josephine, all those hardworking ladies and gentlemen at Imani who made this possible. Grateful. And to the technical team who brought this live on the JoyNews channel, and we've been streaming on myjoyonline.com and all other platforms also. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, I thank myself.